732 million euros. That was the loss suffered by the 5 major European leagues due to the 4,123 injuries in the year 2024. But what's truly concerning is the amazing increase it had over the last few years. In 2021, the number was 376 million. The following year, it rose to 496, then to 669, and finally to 732. We're talking about an increase of almost 100% in just 4 years. The big question is, why is this happening? And even more importantly, why does the impact go much further than that figure? Let's start by understanding how that number is calculated in the first place. The calculation is quite simple. The athlete's salary is multiplied by the amount of time they are off the field. Let's say a player has an annual salary of 30 million. Unfortunately, he tears his anterior cruciate ligament at the start of the season and is out for 6 months. So, the financial loss calculated will be 50% of the whole season, which is about 15 million. Considering that a player is paid to contribute during matches, it makes sense to regard it as a deficit when they can't. The interesting thing about this calculation made by Howden Professional Sport is that it doesn't include any other negative impacts. By this, we mean potential surgeries, rehabilitation, or even interference with team performance. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Once we understood how that figure is calculated, we can move on to the fun part, seeing who suffers the most from this phenomenon and why. In this sense, there's a league that has been a money-losing machine due to injured players, the one and only Premier League. The English threw away 917 million euros over the last 4 years, more than double La Liga, who came in second place with 418 million, and more than triple Ligue 1 in France, the least affected with 291 million. The growth the Premier League experienced year after year was impressive. While in 2021, the figure was 135 million, by 2024, it reached 319 million. That is 135% more. If you had to guess which club suffered the most injuries in the 2023 to 2024 season, what would you say? Yes, Manchester United. It couldn't be any other way. The most significant absences were Luke Shaw and Lisandro Martinez, who were off the pitch for more than 200 days. At the end of the year, the Red Devils had to take on losses of 47 million euros due to various injuries. To put it into context, during that same season, they made a profit of 37 million pounds from player sales, their best figure in the last 15 years. At one point, everything was aimed at covering up injuries, not to mention the impact it had on sports, finishing in the 8th position in the league, their worst result in over 3 decades. However, if we ask ourselves what the most costly individual injury was, then we must look at its neighbors. The pain in Kevin De Bruyne's hamstring cost Manchester City nothing less than 9.5 million euros. Can you imagine what it means to receive those news? You're the owner of a club. You decide to make the $1 million investment to bring in the big star, and shortly after, you find out he will be out of the field. I guess if we really wanted to know how it feels, we could ask Al Hilal from Saudi Arabia, which spent 302 million euros on Neymar, and he only played 7 matches. The Brazilian star earned more than 40 million per match. Not even Taylor Swift makes that much money in one concert night. Anyway, we assume Neymar also contributed a lot in terms of image. Getting back to injuries, the reality is that the Premier League leads for a pretty obvious reason. It offers the highest salaries. A player off the field for 10 days, they're cost considerably more money than in other countries. Therefore, if we want to understand the phenomenon with greater clarity, we should focus on the number of injuries and not necessarily their total economic impact. Here, the conclusion is completely different. The league that is in first place, maybe to the surprise of many, is the Bundesliga. The German competition faced a total of 1,255 injuries in the 23-24 season. It's absolutely mad. In second place, we have the Premier League with 915, followed by La Liga, Serie A, and the French Ligue 1, wrapping up the list with just 437 injuries. This means that in Germany, there were 1/3 more injuries than in England and almost 3 times more than in France. In that country, we are talking about an average of 70 injuries per season per club. Considering that a typical squad includes 23 players, it's like not having the whole team for 3 consecutive match days. I should have mentioned that at this moment. Absolutely mad. The most striking case is that of Bayern Munich itself, accumulating no fewer than 96 injuries in the season. Kingsley Coman and Matthijs de Ligt were 2 of the most significant ones. But if we talk about increasing the number from one season to the next, the prize goes to the Spanish tournament. La Liga went from 538 injuries in 2023 to 862 in 2024. 60% more in just 1 year. If there's one thing that's clear, it's that no matter where we look, injuries are an increasingly significant problem. The 5 major leagues went from 3,000 records in 2021 to 4,123 in 2024, as we mentioned at the beginning. The big question remains, what is the reason behind this? The short answer is The schedule. Using common sense, playing matches every 72 hours, or 48 in the worst-case scenario, means that footballers have very little time to recover. And without proper rest, fatigue kicks in, which inevitably increases the likelihood of injuries. Besides, the increased demand and intensity of current competitions put even more pressure on the body. A study that tracked different teams over 11 years clearly shows these effects. In those matches where there were 3 days of rest or less, the risk of injury increased by 32%. Obviously, even though we analyze the phenomenon at the league level, they are not the only ones to blame for this. Instead, it's more about the accumulation of different tournaments, continental competitions, national cups, and commitments with the national team that don't leave any free spaces throughout the year. Probably, the 2022 World Cup, held in December in the middle of the European calendar, was a key factor for the absences that season. In 2024, we had the European Championship and Copa America. In 2025, the Club World Cup, and in 2026, the World Cup again. All this without mentioning that UEFA expanded the format of their club tournaments. In total, the first division teams of these 5 European countries played 4,232 matches in the 23-24 season. If we remember that 4,123 injuries were recorded, we're talking about practically 1 injury per game. Economically speaking, the figure represents 1,922 euros per minute of play. Yes, you heard it right. Per minute. Coaches and footballers have made their concerns clear. Carlo Ancelotti, in his last stint with Real Madrid, said, "There are too many matches, and the quality of play is suffering. Football is becoming more analytical, intense, and fast, but the schedules are overloaded. There are too many matches, not all of quality, and that leads to an excess of injuries." The incredible thing is that while the federations and organizations responsible for the schedule do not deny this reality, they also do nothing to change it. Alexander Ceferin, president of UEFA, admitted that there are too many matches, probably even today. However, he immediately added, "And the football players, of course, do not want to play more games, but I think these interesting matches will be beneficial for everyone." He was obviously referring to the expansion of the Champions League format, so there don't seem to be any signs that this is going to change in the near future, even with the big threats from the athletes. Rodri pointed out that if things continue this way, they will have to go on strike and refuse to play. If you want us to make another video specifically analyzing how we got to this calendar situation and why it could be even worse in the future, let us know in the comments. At this point in history, we must also be honest and ask the following question. For the 5 major leagues and the clubs that make them up, is the loss of 732 million that we mentioned at the beginning really significant? Let's see. If we do some math, we'll notice that in that season, the European Big Five made no less than 20.4 billion euros. So injuries, calculated in the way we've done so far, represent just 3.6% of that total. Nothing that a couple of extra matches in the Champions League can't fix. But, and here's the big secret of it all, that figure is incredibly far from reflecting all the negative impact that injuries have. Big loss for the team isn't the salary paid to the player to stay at home playing PlayStation, but the team's performance that suffers in their absence. If the team performs worse because of that, we're talking about much more money than those 732 million. We're talking about potential championship losses, getting knocked out in the early stages of European competitions, and even hovering around the relegation zone. The Argentine team, for example, probably wouldn't have collected the $42 million for winning the World Cup if Messi wasn't there. The same with Spain and Lamine Yamal at the Euro 2024, where they received 28 million euros. That's why if we want to measure the true economic burden of an injured player, we have to try to estimate the impact it will have on sports performance. To do this, let's take a concrete case. Perhaps the most recent and relevant one is that of Rodrigo Hernandez at Manchester City. On September 22nd, 2024, with just 21 minutes of play against Arsenal, Rodri collapsed in pain and was replaced off the field. A few days later, the worst news was announced. The Spaniard suffered a tear of the anterior cruciate ligament in his right knee. This diagnosis meant 236 days without setting foot on the playing field. The impact on the team was immediate, and even Pep Guardiola noticed it. When a team is without the best midfielder in the world for a long time, it's a really tough blow. I expect a lot from my players, and I'm obligated to find a solution, even if Rodri is irreplaceable. For Manchester City, paying his salary of 260,000 euros per week while he was recovering was the least of their problems. If we want to deeply understand the impact of Rodri's injury, then we need to crunch some numbers. The first thing we need to be clear about is what the Spaniard meant to the team. In the 23-24 season, he started in 50 games, being the player with the most minutes, 4,325. He practically did not miss any matches. With hindsight, maybe it wouldn't have been bad if he skipped one now and then. In terms of performance, the team won the Premier League for the 4th consecutive time and reached the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Economically, this meant 200 million euros euros from the local tournament, and another 110 million from the European competition. That's 310 million in prizes. Now, if we move on to the 2024 to 2025 season, when Rodri was injured for most of the time, the numbers are considerably different. First of all, the percentage of matches won by the team dropped from 74% to 62%. It's clear that we can't assign 100% of the change to the absence of the midfielder, but it definitely had a significant impact. More importantly, without the involvement of the then Ballon d'Or winner, the Citizens ended up in 3rd place in the Premier League and lost the streak of 4 consecutive titles. As for the Champions League, they finished in 22nd place in the overall standings before being eliminated by Real Madrid in the round of 16. This sporting decline was reflected economically. They earned 185 million from the local tournament, and although we don't have official figures for the European competition, it would be around 86 million. This means a total prize of 271 million. Remembering that last year the figure was 310, we're talking about a drop of 39 million euros. Again, with this, we're not saying that if Rodri had been there, they would have won the league, but it certainly would have helped a lot. And it doesn't end here. Poor sports performance goes far beyond missing out on prizes. It means fewer home games to sell tickets for, club jerseys that aren't selling, and even the loss of certain sponsor clauses that pay out only if they win the championship. Which means the 8.7 million that the club paid Rodri while he was injured is incredibly small compared to the real economic cost of his break. Considering the decline in sports performance, we're talking about more than 50 million euros that just went down the drain. Maybe the only comfort the clubs have is knowing that everyone is more or less in the same situation. There is no big team in Europe that doesn't have a heavy schedule to level the playing field among them. Maybe the most advantaged is PSG, that wins their national league easily, letting them focus on European competition. Just listen to their coach, Luis Enrique. Do you want to be competitive? Give your players a break. After Christmas in the year 2024, they were the ones who gave between 9 and 10 days to each one. 5 months later, they won the Champions League. So it wouldn't be crazy to see more and more substitute teams in certain matches. Because one thing is for sure, more and more football players are getting injured, which negatively affects their sports performance and therefore their ability to generate money. Don't forget to subscribe and we'll read any comment you want to make. See you next time.